In February 2023, Google demonstrated Bard to the world and wiped over $100 billion off its own market cap in a single afternoon. A chatbot, a product Google had arguably invented the intellectual foundations for, and they fumbled the reveal so badly that financial analysts began writing the obituary in real time. The press called it panic. Investors called it incompetence. And for a few weeks, it genuinely looked like the most powerful technology company in the history of the internet had finally met the problem it could not solve. Today, Google is the most comprehensively integrated AI company on Earth. Not OpenAI, not Microsoft, not the 100 well-funded startups that spent 2023 celebrating Google's supposed collapse. According to internal reports that surfaced earlier this year, OpenAI's leadership is actively alarmed by the pace at which Google has closed and surpassed its early lead. The company that was being eulogized is now the company everyone else is benchmarking against in private, while pretending not to in public. So what actually happened? Because this is not a story about a chatbot rivalry, or a product launch cycle, or which large language model scores highest on a benchmark nobody outside of research labs has heard of. This is a story about what happens when a company with $1 trillion distribution network, proprietary silicon running inside its own data centers, and 2 billion active users finally decides to stop protecting what it built and start weaponizing it. And the advantage Google quietly assembled while the world was laughing at it was almost entirely invisible to everyone watching. To understand why Google hesitated, you have to understand what it stood to lose. In 2022, Google's advertising business generated just under $220 billion in revenue. The overwhelming majority of that figure was search, not YouTube, not cloud, search. A single product, built on a single behavior, repeated billions of times a day by billions of people who have been trained since childhood to open a browser, type a question, and scroll past 10 blue links. That behavior was the engine of everything. It funded the data centers, the acquisitions, the moonshots, the entire sprawling empire that Sundar Pichai presided over. And the terrifying thing about a genuinely useful AI assistant is that it threatens to make that behavior obsolete overnight. Why scroll through 10 links when a machine will simply tell you the answer? This is the innovator's dilemma in its purest and most brutal form. The technology that could save Google was also the technology most likely to destroy it. Disrupting yourself requires a level of institutional courage that almost no large organization in history has managed to sustain. The incentives always point the other way. The quarterly earnings call always arrives before the existential threat fully materializes. And so for years, Google did what every dominant company does when confronted with a technology that threatens its core business. It moved carefully, it conducted research, it published papers, it hired the best minds on the planet and then asked them to be patient. Then ChatGPT launched, and patience became a luxury Google could no longer afford. The internal memo that circulated through Google's executive layer in late 2022 used a phrase that would later become infamous inside the company: code red. It was not a product review or a strategy session. It was a declaration that the competitive landscape had fundamentally shifted, and that Google's default position as the internet's front door was no longer guaranteed. ChatGPT had reached 1 million users in 5 days. It took Google's search product years to reach comparable cultural saturation. The speed of adoption was not a statistic. It was a signal. What followed was one of the most dramatic internal mobilizations in Silicon Valley history. Sundar Pichai cancelled leave. Senior researchers were pulled from long-term projects. Teams that had spent years operating in comfortable academic isolation were suddenly asked to ship. The pressure was enormous. The timeline was impossible. And the result, as the world saw in February 2023, was a product that was not ready. But here is what the obituary writers missed. The Bard embarrassment was not evidence of Google's weakness. It was evidence of what happens when a company built for precision and scale tries to move at a startup's pace without the startup's tolerance for failure. The stumble was real. The underlying capability was not the problem. Google's researchers had been working on transformer architecture since 2017. They had published the foundational paper that the entire industry was now building on. The intellectual infrastructure was always there. What Google needed was not a research breakthrough. It needed the institutional will to deploy what it already knew, and that will had now been forced into existence. For most of its history, Google's AI research operated across two largely separate empires. DeepMind, the London-based laboratory acquired in 2014 for over $500 million, pursued artificial general intelligence with the rigor and patience of an academic institution. Google Brain, embedded within the core engineering organization in Mountain View, focused on applied research with direct product relevance. Both were world-class. Both were, for years, operating in parallel rather than in concert. The consolidation that Sundar Pichai announced in April 2023 was not a bureaucratic reorganization. It was an admission that the era of patient siloed research was over. The new entity, Google DeepMind, merged both organizations under Demis Hassabis and created the largest concentration of elite AI talent operating under a single mandate anywhere in the world. The implications were significant and immediate. DeepMind's breakthroughs in protein folding, reinforcement learning, and agent-based reasoning were no longer sitting in a separate building, waiting for a commercial application to justify their existence. They were now directly integrated into a product roadmap that had billions of users waiting at the other end. What this also did, quietly and without much press coverage, was plug a drain. Google had spent years watching its most talented researchers publish groundbreaking papers, establish their reputations, and then leave to found the very startups now threatening to disrupt it. The consolidation created a new gravitational center, a place where the research was not just excellent but consequential. Where the work would actually reach the world, that combination, scale plus meaning, is extraordinarily difficult to replicate, and Google had just made it structural. While the public debate about AI dominance obsessed over model benchmarks and chatbot interfaces, the real competition was being fought in a place most people never think about: the chip. Specifically, the question of who controls the silicon that runs the computation, because whoever answers that question controls the economics of the entire industry. In 2016, Google quietly introduced the first generation of its tensor processing unit, a custom chip designed from the ground up for the specific mathematical operations that power machine learning. Not adapted from a gaming GPU like the processors Nvidia was selling, built from scratch for AI workloads and AI workloads alone. By the time ChatGPT made AI infrastructure a mainstream conversation, Google was already on its 6th generation TPU. They had nearly a decade of proprietary hardware development that no competitor could purchase, license, or replicate at speed. The strategic significance of this is almost impossible to overstate. Every AI company in the world that is not Google is renting its computational power from either Nvidia or the cloud providers. They are subject to chip shortages, supply chain constraints, and the pricing power of a supplier they cannot control. Google pays none of those costs. When Google trains a model or runs inference at scale, it does so on infrastructure it designed, built, and owns outright. The margin advantage is structural. The supply certainty is absolute. And as the demand for AI computation continues its exponential climb, every competitor is paying more for a resource that Google effectively produces internally. That is not a product feature. That is a permanent asymmetry built into the foundation of the race itself. There is a sentence that gets repeated in AI circles so frequently, it has almost lost its meaning. Data is the new oil. But the analogy fails in one crucial direction. Oil runs out. The kind of data Google has been accumulating for 25 years does not. It compounds. Every search query, every email written in Gmail, every document edited in Google Docs, every video watched on YouTube, every route navigated on Google Maps is a data point that trains a more accurate model, which attracts more users, which generates more data, which trains a still more accurate model. The flywheel has been spinning since 1998. By 2024, Google was processing more than 8 billion searches per day. YouTube users were uploading over 500 hours of video every single minute. Gmail had over 1.8 billion active users generating language data at a scale that no synthetic dataset and no web scraping operation could meaningfully replicate. And critically, this was not static data from a historical archive. It was live, continuously updated, human-validated behavioural signal flowing in real time from every corner of the planet in virtually every language in existence. OpenAI trained GPT-4 on a large but ultimately finite snapshot of the internet. Google is training on the internet as it happens. The difference between those two things is not a technical footnote. It is the difference between a map drawn last year and a map updating itself every second. Every competitor is working from last year's map, and the gap between the two does not close. It widens continuously, automatically, and at a scale that requires no additional investment to sustain. By late 2023, a pattern had emerged that very few technology journalists were tracking closely enough. The companies most aggressively racing to challenge Google in AI were also becoming increasingly dependent on Google to do it. Not through any deliberate strategy on Google's part, simply through the economics of infrastructure at scale. Training a frontier AI model requires an almost incomprehensible amount of computational power, sustained over weeks or months, housed in data centers that consume more electricity than some mid-sized cities. Building that infrastructure from scratch requires capital, time, and engineering expertise that almost no organization on the planet possesses. So companies pay for access. They rent compute from cloud providers, and Google Cloud, sitting alongside AWS and Azure as one of the three dominant platforms in the world, was quietly becoming a critical supplier to the very ecosystem that had declared itself Google's replacement. The squeeze was not aggressive or visible, it was simply structural. Every startup training a model on Google Cloud was contributing to Google's revenue, while simultaneously attempting to erode Google's market position. The economics of the cloud business meant that even a successful challenge to Google Search would, in the near term, generate cloud revenue that partially offset the loss. Google had built a position in which its competitors' growth was, to a meaningful degree, financing its own continued dominance. This is what genuine platform power looks like. Not the ability to win every battle outright, the ability to profit from both outcomes regardless of which side prevails. The moment that separated Google's AI strategy from every other company competing in this space was not a model release or a research paper. It was a distribution decision. In May 2024, Google began integrating AI overviews directly into the standard search results page, rolling the feature out to over 1 billion users simultaneously, with no download required, no account creation, and no adoption barrier of any kind. You opened Google, the AI was already there. This is the capability that no competitor has ever been able to replicate, and the reason why is deceptively simple. ChatGPT had to acquire its users. Google already had them. Every person who opened a browser that morning was immediately an AI user, whether they intended to be or not. The distribution channel was not built for this product. The product was inserted into a distribution channel that already touched more daily human behavior than any platform in history. The rollout extended far beyond search. Gemini was embedded into Gmail, offering real-time email drafting and summarization. It appeared in Google Docs, in Google Meet, in Android's core operating system, and across the entire workspace suite used by over 9 million businesses worldwide. The coordinated scale of this deployment had no precedent in the technology industry. Apple took years to integrate Siri meaningfully across its ecosystem. Microsoft's Copilot rollout was staged, subscription-gated, and uneven. Google activated the full weight of its product surface area in a single coordinated push that moved the AI from a product people chose to a feature people encountered. That distinction changes everything about adoption curves, retention, and long-term behavioural lock-in. The most elegant part of Google's AI strategy is that its primary monetization mechanism was already in place before the AI race began. Google does not need to charge users for AI features to extract commercial value from them. It needs AI features to make its existing advertising ecosystem more accurate, more targeted, and more indispensable to the businesses spending money inside it. Every improvement to the AI is, simultaneously and invisibly, an improvement to the advertising product. Consider what a more capable search AI actually means for a business buying Google Ads. It means a more precise intent signal. It means a user who arrives at an ad unit has been understood more deeply, categorized more accurately, and served a result more likely to convert. The advertiser pays for performance. The AI makes the performance better. The advertiser pays more. Google captures the margin without ever billing a single user directly for their AI experience. This is structurally different from how OpenAI or Anthropic monetize. Those companies sell subscriptions and API access. Their revenue scales with the number of paying customers they can acquire and retain. Google's AI revenue scales with the continued existence of commercial activity on the internet. As long as businesses need to reach customers online, and as long as Google's AI makes that process more efficient, the revenue compounds. There is no subscription to cancel, no competitive product to switch to, no moment of friction at which a user might reconsider. The monetization is invisible, automatic, and embedded so deeply into the infrastructure of digital commerce that removing it would require dismantling the internet's advertising layer entirely. The obituary that was written in February 2023 made one fatal error. It is assumed that the AI race was a product competition, that the winner would be whichever company shipped the most impressive chatbot, the most fluent language model, the most compelling consumer interface. Evaluated on those terms, the panic made sense. Google's first public AI product was embarrassing. The competitor was not. But the race was never about the product. It was about who controlled the infrastructure beneath the product. The chips, the data, the distribution, the cloud, the operating system, the browser, the email client, the Maps application, the video platform, and the default search behavior of 8 billion searches per day. Google did not win the AI race by building a better chatbot. It won by being the only company in existence for whom AI was not a new business, but an enhancement to an existing monopoly that already touched more human behavior than any institution in history. The companies that attempted to disrupt Google have, in most cases, ended up dependent on Google's infrastructure, training on Google's cloud, reaching users through Google's Android ecosystem, and monetizing through advertising models that Google's scale makes structurally unbeatable. The disruption became a subsidy. And the deeper truth, the one that the benchmark charts and the model comparisons consistently obscure, is this. Google never needed to be first. It needed to be everywhere. It already was. The AI race did not create Google's advantage. It simply revealed how complete that advantage had always been. The obituary was written too soon. It always was. If this is the first video of ours you have watched, the channel covers exactly this kind of story. The structural forces underneath markets and industries shape outcomes long before the headlines catch up. Subscribe, because the next one is already in production.